The Department of Higher Education and Training has told Parliament that plans to build 2 new universities are at a progressive stage. The country first heard of the universities when President Cyril Ramaphosa made the announcement during the 2020 State of the Nation address. The 2 institutions will be Gauteng-based and will focus on criminology, science and technology. So today we look at the role of universities and tertiary institutions in South Africa and whether they are capable of developing capable graduates with a capacity to respond to the developmental needs of society and the economy. Our guests are Professor Wayne Hugo, researcher in the School of Education at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and Siphokazi Simandla, board member of the ICT SMME Chamber. Great to have both of you. Thanks for being our guests.
Good morning.
So let me start off with the issue in terms of the progress that's been made in South Africa's technological developments. I mean, we've been told that there are going to be these institutions being built, and we saw the focus of them. So, Professor, let me begin with you. Where are we? I mean, how much progress have we made, as far as you know?
So, in terms of how the university space and the research space is responding to these developments, fairly fast and quick. So there's innovation happening across the universities where they kind of recognize what the key new movements are, and then they start up new programs in that. So, for example, with AI, and we're going to talk about that later, data science, all the things going on at that level. There's huge developments in the universities, making sure not only that they've got the infrastructure in place, but also starting to get the qualifications for these programs.
Yeah, which is, I'm happy to hear that, because we need massive training in terms of this world that we're living in, because when these universities and syllabuses were built, I mean, if you look back over the years, how much we've changed, it's dramatic. So let me carry on this conversation, Siphokazi, and ask you, are South Africa's tertiary education institutions and the country's education system actually capable of creating and preparing these graduates that are aligned to the needs of the country and positioned to contribute effectively in building this economy?
They've been making adjustments over the time, but far much more is needed. And I think from the industry side, it's always welcomed to have the movement. If you just look at the requirements of cybersecurity in terms of criminology, this is something that we didn't have to deal with in the past 10 or 15 years. Now it's right at the center of how we manage crime.
Which is vital. Yeah. I mean, sorry, would you like to add on to that, Prof, please?
So absolutely. So look, as good as the universities are doing, there's a real issue in terms of the fact that they've got to offer accredited programs which have gone through the processes of quality assurance in the country. Otherwise, they're not legit. So now what that means is it takes sometimes 2-3 years to get a qualification through. And before that, it was planned. So it means that you're always 3, 4, 5 years behind the curve. In terms of new developments going on in industry. That's unavoidable. But that's for your undergrads. Don't forget, that's teaching. In terms of your actual research, there you're at the cutting edge. There you're at the point of making sure that new developments are being done. So we just got to hold that distinction between the qualifications that are coming through and the research that's being done.
Yeah, which is so important. I mean, I've been playing around with the latest version of ChatGPT. I know that it's a thing, but I mean, you look at it and now when you've got ChatGPT 4 around, I actually cannot believe what this is capable of. And, you ask yourselves, the professions that are at stake or are basically being eliminated through the advancement of technology are immense. We know this, but it doesn't mean that those have to be jobs lost, because, in order to cope with all of this, you need experts in this field to move it forward and to work with what's coming out there. So it's actually just making life easier quicker, but you need to have the professions that can be enhanced by this fast-paced technology. Are we seeing that? Because I worry that as a country we may be falling behind in terms of that. Siphokazi?
I think we are falling behind. Our rate of developing people and making sure they are available is slower than the pace of availability globally. And while the professor is making emphasis on the research side, the bigger bulk of the people that will be employed is developers. So if we have ChatGPT-4, the question should be, how much of that development gets done through the products or people that we produce in the country? And what the next AI, are we part of it or are we just on the consumer? Which means that we always land ourselves on the back of usage of technology instead of the creation.
Yeah, love the way you put that, because that I feel is happening. And we've got institutions like the CSIR who are absolutely incredible and really at the forefront of these things. But, are we training enough graduates to move in that direction? And I think that's a thing we need to look at very closely. I mean, obviously in terms of these universities, so let's focus on that, because this is what we're hearing coming through. Minister Simandla explained that the process of establishing these two new higher education institutions, it happened in April 2021. They appointed a project steering committee with representatives from various organizations and sectors, representatives from existing Gauteng-based universities and provincial governments. So, I mean, as far as you know, Prof, have institutions like UKZN participated in these discussions? Because, I mean, UKZN has positioned itself as a research institution.
So, both of these are Gauteng-based institutions, the one in Hammanskraal and specifically in policing. So that's really got to do with a strong TVET kind of police college background, which in the old Pretoria was where these things happened. And in terms of the Science and Tech University, look, that's happening in Boksburg. And that's got its own whole dynamic to do with, the airports there. You've got huge engineering works in that region. It's like the manufacturing capital of Africa, really, Boksburg, Benoni, that area. So the short answer is no, not in terms of the development of those two universities, but certainly in terms of research that's happening in UKZN, that's ongoing. But that tends to have a KZN focus, agriculture, sugarcane, biodiversity, rural developments going on in terms of child development and gender issues. So it's got a different focus in terms of the two new universities.
Yeah. Which is understandable, and it's quite interesting to see some of the programs that are going to be on offer at these universities. I mean, I'm looking at the Ekurhuleni one, and that one it's quite interesting. I mean, as you say, very aviation focused, a certificate in green energy technologies, agro processing, smart transport and logistics, air traffic controlling. So these are very specific to that, which is a good thing, because there are many South Africans that are looking for a job. But there appears to be less effort placed on entrepreneurship and innovation. And that, I know, is exactly what you have been speaking to, Siphokazi. What role should tertiary education play in steering people towards being problem solvers, thinking outside of the box? I mean, isn't that what formal education is supposed to achieve?
That's correctly. And the emphasis of studying to get a job needs to be watered down with entrepreneurship as the center of it, because then it answers the question that says there are no jobs available for graduates. And then the premise of it is that who said that the jobs of going to school should make you an employee? And maybe we've created that landscape that says you study so that you can get a job. And the more we divorce ourselves from it and we say we study so that you have a skill and a capability to trade, then it means that the requirement for you to be employed becomes reduced. And therefore, the ability for you to work is in your shoulders. and not in whether there's jobs available. And one of the things I must commend the thinking on these two universities is specialization. The South African education system seems to take longer before you can specialize. Whereas if you look at other countries like China and India, they move into specialization much quicker, which means that you don't spend 6 years or 5 years before you become a specialist. And therefore, you become usable in the market much quicker.
I want to, Prof, come to you in terms of, it's a similar question that Siphokazi is responding to, but just to ask you a bit more. You know, obviously, Parliament was told that the Department of Education has spent the last few years conducting feasibility studies for these new universities. So as we've been speaking, I mean, it's one about policing and crime detection in Hammanskraal, and then the other one is science and innovation in Ekurhuleni, but it's very much so for the aviation sector. My question to you is, Prof, are these the critical skills we need in South Africa? I mean, do we have to focus in terms of building these kinds of institutions when perhaps there's a lack elsewhere? What is your view on this?
Okay, so it's a really difficult question. So the way I take it is, let's use an example, like, for example, coding. And your story with ChatGPT-4 and AI. If you try and get the university space to continuously chase the new skills that are in demand, you'll end up in a situation where those new skills can disappear very quickly, and they become outdated and they are not needed anymore. So what's needed now suddenly disappears in a couple of years' time once that demand's been met. So a better way to think about universities is as a space where they're not creating a place for a job for you. They're trying to make you into a more complete and rounded human being, a citizen of the country. And the more rounded and complete you are, the more you're able to then respond intelligently to skills or needs that are in the country and adapt yourself to that later on. So by trying to make the university a space where you're continuously focusing on the specific skill, you're actually risking destroying the capability of your citizenry to respond actively to the problems of the country. And so just to say that it's the same thing with entrepreneurship. To emphasize entrepreneurship as a kind of like a skill means zip if you haven't got a bigger and larger life background to take advantage of those skills.
Yeah.
So that would be my kind of answer to the complexities of that.
And it is very complex. I mean, let's take a guy like Steve Jobs as an example. I'm surrounded by Steve Jobs right now. He designed these devices with a child in mind. That was what he said. He wanted to make it so simple that a baby can operate this with no problem. And that's exactly what he's accomplished. It's my roundabout way of asking you, Siphokazi, this alignment we're talking about between basic education and tertiary education, are we really addressing it? Because when you go into many of the schools here in South Africa, and I'm not talking about your city schools that have got all the money and everything in the world to create these environments that are technologically based, and you give these small group of people the skills to further it in tertiary education. What about the rest of the country and the skills and the basic education that we're giving our children? Let's start there.
There are changes being made, but it's always the rate of change and the impacts that it has in the broader community. And that has been much slower. And also the broader South Africans and the amount of coverage that it can do, it hasn't been as fast as we want it to be. And in the global space, we are still slower to compete if you were to compare the likes of other countries. You know, there's countries like Singapore that have really used technology to help them leap forward. Yeah. And that's the part where even in our best intentions, the alignment doesn't render us to be competitive globally, and so that we are on the side of not only coping, but we move towards trend setting. And unfortunately, we live in a world where we are paced against other people because we are all going for the same pie and trying to get the next Steve Jobs to come out of South Africa. Not only one unicorn, we're looking for a million of those if we're having 62 million people.
Indeed.
That for me is that trajectory, and how big of the throughput can we get through of people that are going to be having a million. When do we have the next Silicon Valley in South Africa? And not only one that is coming along in Cape Town, but 5 that are in the different provinces all around South Africa.
Siphokazi, thank you. Great way to end. Siphokazi Simandla, board member of the ICT SMME Chamber, and Professor Wayne Hugo, researcher in the School of Education at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, talking about the role of tertiary education generally in South Africa amid unemployment and development challenges, and whether the education system is actually capable of developing graduates with a capacity to respond to the developmental needs of society and the economy.